Today, I'm going to talk to you about a resident of Camas Valley that happened to have some extraordinary experiences during World War II. Many of you have seen the movie The Great Escape, starring Steve McQueen, James Garner, Richard Attenborough, and Charles Bronson, among others. While this movie is a lot of fun and great entertainment, it is based on a real event. The events as depicted in the movie have been given the Hollywood treatment, and some of the truth has been modified, but it is altogether a decent attempt at capturing the reality of war. The other part of our discussion is going to focus on the Camas Valley connection to these events. My grandfather, Leo Frazier, happened to be imprisoned in the POW camp portrayed in this movie, known as Stalag Luft 3.
Such a terrible stink in this Third Reich of theirs. The thousands of troops that could well be employed at the front will be tied up here looking after us.
With its compelling blend of Hollywood polish and historical fact, The Great Escape helped to create a lasting tribute to the ingenuity and courage of the real-life men who never stopped fighting, even in captivity.
Unfortunately, we were shot down, so we are both grounded for the duration of the war.
Well, you speak for yourself, Colonel.
It is such an exciting movie. It's a great story on screen, and I think it's convinced a lot of people to go and look up the real history. It convinced me. It was the film that got me interested in pursuing this historical event.
The Great Escape had certain Hollywood flair, obviously, a little over the top, but you can understand why, for the drama.
In a day when we don't have many heroes, it's kind of nice to see some heroes resurface. And while there's a part of it that just instinctively says, yeah, but that's Hollywood, there's the other part of us that says, like I did, if even a fraction of that was true, and it was, then here's something to sit up and take notice and maybe find some inspiration.
To the colonies. Independent.
There were a couple of points that were made in that clip that I'd like to reiterate. First of all, I hope that this discussion leads you to take another look at your own family history. There are remarkable stories in everyone's family, and while not all of them are as dramatic or as recognizable as today's topic, they're remarkable all the same. Secondly, I hope that every one of us can take some inspiration from the people that we look at today. I'm not presenting my grandpa as some sort of a hero for all of you to celebrate, but rather as an example of the regular, everyday folks that through necessity are able to rise to any occasion. Those people are around us every day. We just need to realize it. So Leo Frazier was born on April 12, 1917, in Aurora, Sevier County, Utah, to Robert Burness and Agnes Ann White Frazier. Agnes was born and raised in Beaver County, and Robert was born in Rockport and was raised there for some time before his family moved to Oakland. Leo graduated from South Summit High School and attended Brigham Young University, where he graduated with a degree in finance and accounting. It was now 1940, and the Selective Service Act was reinstituted on September 16, 1940. When Leo registered, his draft number was 89, meaning he would be an early draftee. Not wanting to be a lowly enlisted man and hoping to avoid the Army, he set about applying to Officer Candidate School. The major requirements for OCS was a college degree and an appointment from a government official, usually a senator or congressman. Leo wanted to join the Navy, but his physical showed that he needed to have his tonsils removed. By the time this was completed, the only spot available was in the Army Air Corps. On April 28, 1941, just over 7 months before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Leo boarded a train for Oxnard, California, and flight training school. After 2 months of beginning level flying lessons, Leo washed out as a pilot due to imperfect depth perception. However, he still had options in the Air Corps. He was given the option of becoming a navigator or a bombardier on the medium or heavy bombers. The pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier were all officers on bomber crews. Even though he had a degree in finance and accounting, Leo hated the kind of math that a navigator was required to complete on every flight, so he decided to become a bombardier. And of course, in true military fashion, Leo was assigned a navigator training. After a few months on furlough, Leo was ordered to report to Ellington Field, Texas for navigator training. He was in Houston, Texas on the morning of December 7th when the shocking news reached him. On April 1st, 1942, Leo and his class graduated from advanced navigator training and officially joined the ranks of the Army Air Corps. His first assignment was with the 97th Bomb Group, where he and his crewmates would be flying B-17 Flying Fortresses. A B-17 had 10 crewmen, a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, flight engineer / top turret gunner, a ball turret gunner, 2 waist gunners, and a tail gunner. At this time, all of the bombers were being flown to England via a southern route to Brazil, across the ocean to Africa, and then north to England. This was taking too much time, and it was decided that a shorter northern route would be optimal. Leo was assigned to fly with the 1st Squadron to blaze this northern route. The plan was to fly to Newfoundland, over to Greenland, to Iceland, and then Scotland before heading to bases in England. This flight was a disaster. With a major snowstorm stalking in the airfield in Greenland, planes were diverted to a secondary airfield, but 7 of the 9 planes ran out of gas before reaching it. They were forced to crash land on Greenland among the ice. We're not going to go into the saga of My Gal Sal at this time, but there was a Life magazine article written about it, and there's a few copies over on the table and in the booklet that's there. I encourage you to take a look at it. It's a pretty amazing story, but not the one we're focusing on today. This, however, is the actual My Gal Sal that Leo was flying on that crash landed in Greenland. It has been restored and is now hanging in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, Louisiana. So, after the Greenland fiasco and rescue, Leo was again sent home for a short furlough before being assigned to a new bomb group, the 44th, and assigned to Shipdham Airfield in Norfolk, England. And this is Shipdham, and on the map you can see where the Shipdham is on the map there. So he was also assigned to a new plane at this time, the B-24 Liberator. This picture on the left is some B-24s in flight, actually doing a parachute drop. And the picture on the right is a line of B-24s taking off from Shipdham Airfield. As you notice, the ambulance is lined up in case of any accidents there. So, 44th Bomb Group was known as the Flying 8 Balls. You can see their unit patch there in the upper right corner. It was a pretty famous bomb group among those that were assigned to England and to Europe. Some of the highlights of that unit, it was stationed in Shipdham for most of the war. It was one of the first American bomb groups assigned to England. The 44th set a number of records, including the number of missions flown from England during the war, the total sustained losses by the bomb group, as well as many other facts that you can see. The memorial in the picture there on the right is actually in Grove, Oklahoma, which is the original home of the 44th Bomb Group. So, during Leo's first 10 flights, he crash landed a second time. After a bombing run, his plane ran out of gas. They actually crash landed in Wales, just in a field in Wales, on January 3rd, 1943. The airplane was named the Texan. All 11 crew members were okay, no serious injuries, and all returned to duty. On March 8th, 1943, Leo would partake in his final mission of the war. Leo's 11th mission would be his last for the war. A small group of bombers was assigned to bomb the railroad yards at Rouen, France. Initially, Leo was not assigned to go on this mission as part of his regular crew was unavailable. The remaining crew felt that this mission would be an easy mission to complete, and once air crews reached 25 missions, they either were sent home permanently or for an extended furlough. So all the air crews were trying to complete missions. This one was supposed to be as easy because they were intended to have fighter escorts, as well as not traveling too far into France. As you can see on the map there on the left, that little blue dot is where they were headed to bomb. So they scraped together enough free crewmen from other flight crews to fly the mission. 18 bombers were meant to take part in this mission, but one bomber aborted on takeoff due to mechanical problems. It was a relatively easy mission, but the fighter planes didn't show up. 2 of the 17 remaining planes were shot down. The alarm to bail out on Leo's plane was sounded, and his exit point was the wheel well of the front landing gear. The plane started into some violent spins, and Leo was more or less thrown out of the wheel well. Leo wrote, "I do not remember pulling the ripcord nor falling, as I was partially unconscious due to the lack of oxygen. When I came to, I was floating toward the ground. And as I looked around, I saw 2 German fighters circling me. I thought they were going to use me for target practice or come close enough to spill my chute, and I was mighty frightened. When he hit the ground, there were German soldiers waiting for him." Leo was slightly injured in the bailout. He thought he had broken his left arm, and he had a cut above his right eye. He spent 2 nights in an army hospital near Rouen, where the Red Cross made contact, and he met 2 airmen from the other plane that was shot down in his flight. The 3 of them were the only survivors from the 2 planes. Leo was then sent to Saga, Germany, which is now Sagan, Poland, and Stalag Luft 3, which is located on that right-hand map, that little blue dot. When he arrived at Stalag Luft 3, he heard the infamous German greeting, "For you, the war is over."
What were you doing, by the way?
Well, like I told Max, I was trying to cut my way through your wire because I want to get out.
Durchsuchen Sie ihn.
Bitte.
You speak German?
Jawohl, Herr Oberst.
Wire cutters.
Jawohl, Herr Oberst.
I have had the pleasure of knowing quite a number of British officers in this war, and I flatter myself that we understand one another. You are the first American officer I've met. Hills, isn't it?
Captain Hills, actually.
17 escape attempts.
18, sir.
Tunnelman, engineer.
Flyer.
I suppose what's called in the American Army a hotshot pilot. Unfortunately, you were shot down anyway. So we are both grounded for the duration of the war.
Well, you speak for yourself, Colonel.
You have other plans?
I haven't seen Berlin yet, from the ground or from the air, and I plan on doing both before the war's over.
Are all American officers so ill-mannered?
Yeah, about 99%.
Then perhaps while you are with us, you will have a chance to learn some. 10 days isolation hills.
Captain Hill.
20 days.
Right. Oh, you'll still be here when I get out.
Cooler.
So, these are the two telegrams that Leo's parents received in Oakley. The mission was on March 8th. The first telegram here on the left, reporting Leo as missing in action, was received on March 15th. The second telegram there on the right, reporting him as a POW, was received on March 22nd. For 2 weeks, his parents didn't know what had happened or if he was alive. A couple of notes on Stalag Luft 3. Stalag is a shortened version of a German word meaning prison. Luft is a word for air, and 3 was simply the designation for this camp. Germany did something with the POWs that was unique at the time. Each branch of their military was responsible for their counterparts' prisoners. So the German Air Force was responsible for the Allied Air Force prisoners. That is why the Luft is added to the name of the camp. It designates it as an Air Force POW camp. Ultimately, this would be beneficial to the prisoners of the camp. They were treated somewhat better than Army prisoners were. The rules, as you can see here, The garden rule was required so the prisoners could contribute to their own upkeep and provide some of the food required. It'll come back to bite the Germans, as you'll see in a moment. I also want to point out the seriousness of the first 2 rules. It's break the rules and you'll be shot. The drawing or the picture of the camp here also shows one compound. Ultimately, at Stalag Luft 3, there would be 4 compounds built.
Success.
So you can see the deadly seriousness of the rules. But despite this, for the most part, camp life was boring. The prisoners were allowed a number of distractions. They were allowed to play sports with the equipment being provided by the Red Cross. The Americans played a lot of baseball and the British played soccer. A theater building was built and plays, debates, and concerts were all performed. Most of the cooking was done by the prisoners, as was any of the cleaning that could be done. The one part of life in this camp that wasn't boring, however, was the escape plan.
We can't destroy the dirt, we can't eat it. The only thing left to do is camouflage it. That's as far as my thinking takes me.
Can they teach you promptness in the RN? You'll never believe it, but I think I have the solution. The problem is somehow to get rid of this tunnel dirt over the compound.
Well, of course.
Would you mind? Now, you fill these bags with the dirt from the tunnel. Then, wearing them inside your trousers, you wander out into the compound, where you pull these strings in your pockets. Out come the pins. Eric, it's good. All you have to do is kick it in. Unless you're a complete fool, the ferrets will never see a thing.
It's indecently brilliant. What do you think, Roger, eh?
We'll try it first thing tomorrow.
I already have. It works.
Mac, this is what we'll do.
Present from Tom's.
Ah, thank you, Nemo.
So as you can see from the clip, that is how the gardens came back to bite the Germans. The dirt that was being excavated from the tunnels was a much different color than the dirt on the surface of the camp. Everything shown in that clip actually took place. The little bags in the trousers, mixing the dirt in the gardens, all of it is true. The plan included 3 tunnels. They were codenamed Tom, Dick, and Harry. Digging the tunnels was a pretty remarkable feat. The ground was composed of sandy material. It was a massively long distance to dig. As you can see in this sketch here, or as you can see, is not shown in this sketch, there were microphones buried in the ground to detect any underground digging. Keep in mind that there were no shovels, no tools except for some improvised implements. You can see on the slide how long the tunnel was compared to an American football field.
This is a full-size replica of the tunnel in Stalag Luft 3. So what we have here, everyone. There is the sand. Okay. And there is the tunnel. That's exactly the size it would have been. Now, they had to make the tunnel in, the sand was really just running everywhere like water. And what they used was the bedboards from their beds, right? And they would put them on the ground like this. And they'd put them up in the on the sides, yeah, like that, yeah.
Okay. So I see like this, yeah.
Yeah, like that. And you see how the shape of it, it's cut, so each board just fits in like that. It's like,
you're building kind of lining to the tunnel.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice finish. Lovely.
Nice finish. This is good sort of, yeah, exactly. And the idea was that they had to cut everyone the same, and they didn't have a saw, so they had to make a saw. Now, one of the things they had was in their sort of Red Cross parcels, they were sent gramophone records, and they used to cut the records up to make things like the compasses they needed to guide themselves after they escaped. But inside the gramophone record players was the spring, which they'd wind up, and that would play the records. And that spring, that metal was very valuable.
Useful bit of metal.
Useful bit of metal, because what they then did was they cut with a little file, which they nicked from somewhere, they cut saw teeth. And they used the little saws they made.
That's ingenious, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely ingenious. And it's all about, doing stuff Well, they had plenty of time on their hands, and what they could do then with those saws is they could cut. You know,
and they're doing all this in total secrecy as well. That's the extraordinary thing about it.
And there's thousands of these boards.
Yeah, all the beds.
Now, the thing is that they had to fit the boards. This was sort of 100 meters long, over 300 feet long. So you had to get right the way down to the face of the tunnel.
Come on, Hugh, get in there. Let's have a look. This is what you're famous for.
So they had to make a trolley. They used these milk cans to make the wheels and bits of reinforcement bar they nicked. And so what they would do, to get to the end of the tunnel, there's a rope that they would have to pull on. Here's the rope. And they'd go in here and they'd pull themselves.
And I'd be pumping oxygen down.
So this is the actual site of the camp today. The picture on the left shows a recreated tunnel with the homemade trolley. Notice that the wheels were made of powdered milk cans that came in the Red Cross parcels. The picture on the right here shows the surface above where the tunnel was dug, as well as the perimeter fence, and the rock in the background designates where the end of the tunnel came up. It was about 5 to 10 feet short of where it was intended to be.
How soon's that air pump going to be ready?
Oh, I'll have it for you tomorrow, Roger.
You're badly behind schedule, said you go, Cobber. How's it coming, Danny?
No good.
No good?
Today, 3 times.
You all right?
Woo!
So as you can see, tunneling did not come without its risks. Before the escape actually took place, the Americans were transferred out of the compound into a different camp. So when the escape took place, no actual Americans escaped in the Great Escape. They were all British or Commonwealth country airmen. Yes, okay, sorry. Lost for a second. Okay, so the escape. The escape took place on the night of March 24th, 25th of 1944. It was intended that 200 prisoners would escape that night. And the interesting thing to remember about the escape is as soon as the tunnel broke through the ground to surface, the escape had to start. When they broke through the surface, they discovered that the tunnel was short by about 10 feet of their intended target. So when they had first planned it out, they had planned to send one prisoner out every minute through the tunnel until the 200 men had escaped. Because the exit was short, they were only able to get a prisoner out every 10 minutes. When the 77th prisoner was seen exiting the tunnel. Because of this, the others did not have much of a head start in their escape.
Los, aufstehen. Hände hoch.
So that was Hollywood's version of the escape. The motorcycle chase didn't actually happen. We wanted to play it because it's one of the most well-known clips in the movie. But that was Steve McQueen's idea. 73 of the 76 escapees were recaptured. 2 men were able to escape through Sweden, and 1 escaped through Spain. They were eventually, all 3, able to return to England. Of course, Hitler was furious. He wanted all of the recaptured men to be executed. His underlings weren't so sure and kept passing the buck lower down the chain of command until someone would agree to give the order to kill the men. Because the escapees had sewn civilian clothes and German military uniforms to wear during the escape, they could be considered spies when they were recaptured. The rules of war allowed for the execution of all 73. In the end, however, 50 of them were executed. The remaining 23 were returned to Stalag Luft 3 before being scattered among many different camps. And that is a picture of the memorial to the 50 that is at the side of the camp. Before we play this clip, this is some of the men that were in the camp that helped dig the tunnels, helped with the escape, but did not actually escape. Just the audio and video is a little rough, but it's the best copy we could find.
But the 50 murdered airmen were always remembered by those who had decided not to take their chances in the tunnel.
If I had gone, I probably wouldn't be here now. I'd have missed a wonderful life. But then so did 50 others. I feel I've been the lucky one. Did I deserve to be the lucky one? I don't know.
So back to Camas Valley. Leo, as we mentioned, was transferred to a different camp as the Russians got closer and more prisoners were taken. They sent him to a different camp. There's a story, a bit of a newspaper story about the 10,000 Yanks. This was in January that they were sent on a march to the new camp. Anyway, on April 29th of 1945, Leo and his fellow POWs were liberated by regiments of Patton's Third Army. Leo was sent back to America as quickly as the bureaucracy of military life could operate. On July 29th, 1945, he married Roberta Horton of Oakley and was then sent to a military hospital in the state of Washington to undergo treatment for ulcers and malnutrition. He retired as a captain with a Purple Heart for his injuries received during his final mission and an Air Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster. Leo and Roberta bought a home in Oakley and then purchased the Weaver Mercantile, which is now Ken's Cash, from Leo's parents. They sold the store in 1971, and Leo served as Summit County Assessor for about 12 years before he retired. Leo and Roberta had 3 children, Blair, my dad Blake, and Dana. Leo passed away in 2003 at the age of 86. So one of the reasons we are focusing on veterans is because of a planned Camas Valley Veterans Memorial. And I say planned in the loosest terms because The details are not confirmed yet. One thing we want to ask for your help and for you guys to share is the committee that's looking at the Veterans Memorial is looking for opinions and ideas for it. There's not a site selected yet. There's not a design selected, but I will say on behalf of the Camas Valley History Group, we're actively working on collecting the names of veterans and those who have served from the valley. There are some ideas there that have been thought of and a possible location, but again, this is very preliminary. Kate Wynn, Paul's other half, is part of the committee, and if you have opinions or ideas, talk to Kate and she'll get you the contact information for the committee on this project. Okay. Video or just, okay, sorry. Yeah, this is just, again, the memorial to the 50 and the oft-heard refrain of lest we forget. And at the end of the movie, it does say that the picture is dedicated to the 50 who were murdered. So that's Leo's story. What's yours? We'd love to hear not only today, but in the future of any of your service memories, your histories, any of that, anything that's relevant. But before we move on, we would like to recognize any veterans that are here today. So if any veterans are here today, please stand up. I also, at things like this, always like to add that members of the family of servicemen and women should also be recognized because they are serving right alongside those men and women. So if you have a close relative who served or is serving, please stand up. So, yes, thank you, veterans. I hope we always do a great job of honoring veterans. There are several members of our group here that if you have stories or something you'd like to share with the group, grab one of us. We'll get you contact information so we can make contact. But before we end, any questions anybody have? Yes. When he was, sorry. So he was born in 1917, so he joined when he was 24, and then he was released when he was 28, roughly. Yes.
How far down was the tunnel?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's 8.5 meters. So this slide shows that. So there you go. So on the left-hand side.
So roughly 30 feet down. Yes. What happened to them, or were they covered so that they dug deep enough? That's why they had to go 30 feet down, that they avoided them. And we didn't. There's a lot of detail. I mean, I could go for hours on detail, but then the eyes glaze over and everything. But there were 3 tunnels, and 2 of them were discovered. One of them was sort of given to the Germans, so they'd stopped looking for this tunnel that was the one that they were using. So there were 2 other tunnels that were discovered. Yes. Yeah, so what he says that he had no talents as far as engineering or forging. This was a very well set up program. So they always had guards coming in and out, and they set up a relay system to notify the diggers that their guards were coming. He was part of that, and there's also a part, they had to forge documents. They were hoping that they could use passports and stuff to pass off as German civilians. So he was working with forgers in keeping some of those documents hidden. He talks about a violin case they had that they kept some of the tools for the forgery in, and he was responsible for hiding that and making sure it wasn't found. The other thing I'd really like to point out, you remember the clip where they showed how they built the tunnel with the bed boards? Every board that they took into the tunnel allowed a greater chance of being found by the Germans because it was missing from where it was supposed to be. They were taking wood from the inside of their huts, in the attic especially, but every time they took something that was supposed to be in a certain place, it increased the risk of being found that it was missing. Yeah.
I imagine they would have roll calls that everybody that was working the tunnel had to get out to be counted.
Yes.
Let alone cleaned up.
Yeah, they did a lot of the digging at night. So all the tunnels started from different points in huts. They showed it, if you were here at the very first, one was under a stove, one was in the shower drain, and the other, my mind just went blank, but somewhere similar to that. But they do it mostly at night. And they talk about, they call it the green book, but they had the schedule of every guard in the camp in this book, and they'd assign some prisoner to follow that person around and make notes. This guard, went to get lunch at this time. So they have that book, and it's actually funny because it mentions at one time that they actually give that book to the Germans to prove that some of the guards had run off during their duty time and were court-martialed by the Germans. So it wasn't a hidden book at this point. And the other interesting thing I'd say is the Germans knew that the prisoners were working on escaping. And maybe that's common with every prison camp, but they knew they were doing it. It was just kind of a race to see if they could escape before they were found, type of thing. So yeah, I'll just quickly back in the back, some memorabilia of my grandfather's, his uniform. There's also some hats. There's a lot of reunions that they had for both prisoners of war and his 44th Bomb Group. So some of those items that they received at those are back there. You're welcome to take a look. Also, we did mention the veterans we're trying to collect. These are just some of them we have, but if you have a family member who's a veteran, we'd love to have that information. Yes.
Don't think about that. Grandpa never talked about being in. Now, Blake was his son, and he knew nothing about his dad being a prisoner of war until he went to the high school to a veterans program and heard his dad talk, and that was when he was a freshman. Before he knew anything about it, because the World War II vets did not talk about the time in the war.
Oh, yeah, and one thing that Paula has found in his research is some of the escape stuff they weren't allowed to talk about because future wars, they might use those techniques. So some of that they weren't allowed or were heavily discouraged to talk about. But that does bring up one other thing I want to say. Most of our World War II vets are gone now. Let's not let Korean, Vietnam vets pass away without that history. Once it's gone forever. So, yeah, if you know a vet, it's a little difficult at times if they don't want to talk about it, but at least get the bare minimum from them.
Dad served in World War II the whole time, and he didn't talk about it. He wouldn't talk about it. Well, when I was in 8th grade, he came and talked to my class, so I had the same kind of experience. And then my younger brother and I went for a hike with him one day, and he opened up. My brother doesn't remember a single story, so I'm realizing that I am the one in the family who has this information from my dad, and so I will have to write it. And also, though, my niece found out that even though Dad was in the Navy, he was part of the Alamo Scouts at one point. And the reason Dad couldn't talk was that everything he did with the Alamo Scouts was top secret, and he never was allowed to talk about it. So there was that.
Yes.